day after day after day after day. I'm just busy. That's what I'm thinking about. The days just fly by. And winter's worse because, winter, night falls at 4:30 and the day feels over, which it's not. But the day feels like it's over. It's like, oh, this barely day never started. So, and now here, the days, weeks, months, and years are starting to fly by. But hopefully, with school over.
Good evening! Welcome to the Red Barn Playhouse, home of the North Franklin Theater Group. I am Matt Manili, and I am the Board of Directors President, welcoming you to A Christmas Carol. Thank you so much for coming. So emergency exits, door you came through. There's one behind the stage, just kick the cat out of the way. Go that way, and then there's one over there to the right. This show, A Christmas Carol, it's been a labor of love of mine. The version you're going to see tonight, I adapted from the book and from a version of this book that Charles Dickens used to use when he did public readings. And the New York Public Library actually has the book, and so I was able to get scans of it. And it's got his notes and everything in the margins and what parts not to read. So I used that and this book to put together the adaptation you're going to see tonight. And I'm so very excited for you to see it. This cast has done an amazing job. So without any further ado, present A Christmas Carol.
Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourned. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for, I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, his sole mourner. Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood or nothing wonderful can come of the story I'm going to relate. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name, however. There it stood years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. He answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone was Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no stone had ever struck out fire. Secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. A frosty rime was on his head, his eyebrows, and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days, and he didn't thaw at 1 degree Christmas. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, upon a Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. His door opened so that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond a sort of tank was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore, the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed.
A Merry Christmas, Uncle. God save you.
Cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation Scrooge had of his approach.
Ah, humbug.
Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure.
I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be married? You're poor enough.
Come then, what right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough.
Ah, humbug.
Don't be cross, uncle.
What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen a month presented dead against you. If I had my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart.
Uncle!
Nephew, keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine.
Keep it, but you don't keep it.
Let me leave it alone then. Much good it has done you, much good it has ever done you.
There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come round, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow travelers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, God bless it.
Bob Cratchit, still in the tank, involuntarily applauds.
Let me hear another sound at you, Mr. Cratchit. You'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir. I wonder you don't go into Parliament.
Oh, don't be angry, uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow.
Oh, I'll see you all right. I'll see you in hell first.
But why?
Why did you get married?
Because I fell in love.
Because you fell in love. Good afternoon.
No. Nay, uncle, but you never came to see me before that. So why give it as a reason for not coming now?
Good afternoon.
I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?
Good afternoon.
I'm sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I've made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle,
Good afternoon.
and a Happy New Year!
Good afternoon.
His nephew left the room but stopped at the outer door to bestow the greeting of the season on the clerk who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially.
There's another fellow, my clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and a family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam.
The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him.
Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?
Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night.
This festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at this present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries, and hundreds of thousands are in want of common comfort, sir.
Are there no prisons?
Well, plenty of prisons.
And the union workhouses? They still in operation?
They are. Still, I wish I could say they were not.
The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor then?
Both very busy, sir.
Oh, well, I was afraid from what you had said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We chose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for?
Nothing.
You wish to be anonymous?
I wish to be left alone. Since you asked me what my wish is, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the prisons and the workhouses. They cost enough. Those who are badly off must go there.
Many can't go there, and many would rather die.
If they would die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, I don't know that.
But you might know it.
It's not my business. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge, dismounting from his stool, tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly stuffed his candle out and put on his hat.
You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose.
It's quite convenient, sir.
It's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself mightily ill-used, I'll be bound. And yet you don't think me ill-used when I take a day's wages for no work.
It's only once a year, sir.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier the next morning.
Oh, I will, sir. I will indeed. Good night, sir, and Merry Christmas.
Humbug!
The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide at the end of the lane of boys 20 times in honor of it being Christmas Eve, and then ran home as hard as he could pelt to play at blind man's buff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms. Nobody lived in them but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door of his house, except that it was very large. Also, that Scrooge had as little of what fancy about him as any man in the city of London, and yet, Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face.
Marley?
Marley's face, with a dismal light about it. Not angry or ferocious, but it looked as Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up upon its ghostly forehead. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was the knocker again. He said,
Humbug!
He closed the door with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for it being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he set his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa. A small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and a little saucepan of gruel upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in this dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. He closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. He took off his cravat, put it on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the very low fire to take his gruel. His glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten, with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and with a strange inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. Soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This was succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cell.
Scrooge!
Then he heard the noise, much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door.
It's humbug still, I won't believe it.
The color leaves Scrooge's face, though, as the source of the noise comes on through the heavy door and passes into the room before Scrooge's very eyes. The same face, the very same. Marley, in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard said that Marley had no bowels, but he'd never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now. Though he looked the phantom through and through and saw it standing before him, so he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about his head and chin. He was incredulous.
How now? What do you want with me?
Much.
Marley's voice, no doubt about it.
Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Who were you then?
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
Can you sit down?
I can.
We'll do it then.
Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, but the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace as if he were quite used to it.
You don't believe in me.
I don't.
What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?
I don't know.
Why do you doubt your senses?
Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. But there's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are.
Ah!
At this, the spirit raises a frightful cry and shakes its chain with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge holds on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon. Marley starts taking off the bandage round its head as if it were too warm to wear indoors. When Marley's lower jaw drops down to his breast, Scrooge falls on his knees and claps his hands before his face.
Mercy, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?
Man of worldly mind, do you believe me in me or not?
I do, I must, but why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk along among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit does not go forth in life, it's condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me, to witness what I cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned it to happiness.
You are fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life, and he made it link by link and yard by yard, and I girded it in my own free will. And of my own free will I wore it. It was the pattern strange to you. But would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy as it was this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain.
Scrooge glances about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he sees nothing.
Jacob. Old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob.
I have none to give. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house in life. My spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing home.
But you were always a good man of business.
Business? Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business.
It held up its chain at arm's length as if that were the cause of its unwilling grief and flung it heavily upon the ground again.
At this time of the rolling year, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to the blessed star which led me to the wise men to the poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which his light would conduct me? Hear me! My time is nearly gone.
I will, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray.
I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and a hope to escape my fate. A chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer.
Oh, you always were a good friend to me, thank you.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob?
It is.
I think I'd rather not.
Without their visit you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow night when the bell tolls 1.
Couldn't I take them all at once and just have it over with, Jacob?
Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third on the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us.
It walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the apparition reached it, it was wide open. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as he'd locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. Scrooge tried to say, "Humbug," but stopped at the first syllable. And being from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, he went straight to bed without undressing and fell asleep on the instant. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavoring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly.
Was it a dream or not?
Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone 3/4 more, when he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past.
Quarter past. Half past. A quarter to it. The hour itself. And nothing else.
Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn by a strange figure like a child. Yet not so like a child, as like an old man. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age. And yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. Though the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using its duller moments a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm.
Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who? What are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
long past?
No, your past.
What business brings you here?
Your welfare.
Well, I'm much obliged, but I wonder if a good night's sleep wouldn't be more conducive to that end.
Your reclamation, then. Take heed, rise, and walk with me.
It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, that bed was warm and the thermometer a long way below freezing, that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap.
I am mortal and liable to fall.
Bear but a touch of my hand, and you shall be uphold in more than this.
Scrooge touches the ghost's heart, and they pass through the wall. Scrooge and the ghost stand in an open, sunlit country road, with fields on either hand. It's clear, cold winter day, with snow upon the ground. Scrooge looks about and claps his hands together.
Good heaven, I was bred in this place. I was a boy here.
The spirit gazed upon him mildly. He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten.
Your lip is trembling. And what is that upon your cheek?
Nothing. It's just a pimple. I beg you, spirit, lead me where you would.
And that bleak building over there?
Oh, that building. I was a boy there. Yes. I went to school in that horrible place.
You recollect the way.
Remember it, I walk it blindfold.
Strange to have forgotten it for so many years. Let us go on.
They walk along the road. Scrooge points out every gate, post, and tree. Some shaggy ponies with boys upon their backs trot down the road towards Scrooge and the ghost. The boys call to the other boys in country gigs and carts, driven by farmers. All are in great spirits and shout to each other.
These are but the shadows of things that have been. They have no consciousness of us. The school is not quite deserted. Look through the window into that cold, barren room. A solitary child neglected by his family,
Yes.
alone.
Yes, I see. I know that boy. Oh, I was so lonely. Poor boy.
Come, Ebenezer Scrooge, let us see another Christmas.
Scrooge's younger self suddenly morphs into an older boy, and the room becomes a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrink, the windows crack, fragments of plaster fall out of the ceiling. But his former self is still alone. All the other boys have gone home again for the holidays. Scrooge looks at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head, glances anxiously towards the door. It opens, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, stands at the threshold looking in. It's Scrooge's sister, Fan. The elder Scrooge is amazed to see her.
Dear, dear brother. I have come to bring you home, dear brother.
Home, little Fan?
Yes, home for good and all. Home forever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be. This home is like heaven.
For you, perhaps, but not for me.
He spoke so gently to me one dear night, I was not afraid to ask him if you might come home. And he said, yes, you should. And sent me in a coach to bring you. And you're to be a man and are never to come back here. But first, we're to be together all the Christmas long and have the merriest time in all the world.
Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered. But she had a large heart.
So she had.
She died a woman, and had, as I think, children.
One child.
True, your nephew, Fred.
Yes.
Come, Ebenezer Scrooge, let us see another Christmas.
As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood in the busy thoroughfares of a city. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here, too, it was Christmas time. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door.
Do you know this place, Ebenezer Scrooge?
Know it? No, this is the counting house where I was apprenticed.
They went in. At sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig, sitting behind such a high desk that if he'd been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried in great excitement.
Why, it's old Fezziwig. Bless his heart. Fezziwig alive again. And hosting one of his Christmas parties.
Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, and called out in a comfortable, jovial voice,
Yo ho there, Ebenezer and Dick!
a living and moving picture of Scrooge's former self. A young man came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow prentice.
Dick Wilkins. Oh, my old fellow prentice, to be sure. Bless me. Yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Oh, poor Dick. Dear, dear.
Yo ho, my boys! No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas Eve, Christmas Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man could say Jack Robinson. Clear away, my lads, and I must have a lot of room here. Clear away.
There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off. The floor was swept in water. The lamps were trimmed. Fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, and went up to the lofty desk, and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomachaches.
Well done.
There were dances and more dances, and there was cake, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was mince pies, and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when the fiddler struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Top couple, too, they shone in every part of the dance. When the clock struck 11, his domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on every side of the door, either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas.
A small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. He spent but a few pound of your mortal money, 3 or 4 pound at most. Is that so much that he deserves your praise?
It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks and things so slight and insignificant that it's impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune.
He felt the spirit's glance and stopped.
What's the matter?
Nothing particular.
Something, I think.
No, I just like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk right now. That's all.
My time grows short.
Again, he saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a black dress, in whose eyes there were tears.
It matters little to you, very little. Another idol has displaced me. And if it can comfort you in time to come, as I would have done, I have no just cause to grieve.
What idol has displaced you?
A golden one.
Oh, this is the even-handed dealing of the world. There is nothing on which is so hard as poverty. There is nothing that professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth.
You fear the world too much. I have seen your noble aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, gain, engrosses you.
Oh, what then? Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I'm not changed towards you.
Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man.
It was a boy.
Your own feelings tells you that you were not what you are. I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it and can release you.
Have I ever sought release?
In words, no,
In
never.
what then?
In a changed nature, an altered spirit. If this had never been between us, tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now?
You think not.
I would gladly think otherwise if I could. But if you were free, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? You who weighs everything by gain. With a full heart for the love of him you once were, I release you from our engagement.
He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed.
May you be happy in the life you have chosen.
Spirit, show me no more. Tugs me home. Why do you delight to torture me?
I told you, these are the shadows of the things that have been. That they are what they are, do not blame me.
Remove me. I cannot bear it. Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer.
In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle, in which the ghost, with no visible resistance on its own part, was undisturbed by any effort of its adversary, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright. He seized the extinguisher cap, and by a sudden action pressing it down upon its head, the spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form. But though Scrooge passed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the floor. As he struggled with the spirit, he was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed and barely time to reel to bed, before he sank into a heavy sleep.
Okay, we're going to take a brief 10-minute intermission. Thank you.
On the stroke of one, Scrooge awakened suddenly and sat bolt upright in his own bed. He remembered the words of Marley's ghost and wondered from which direction the second specter would appear. At that moment, nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. Now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing. And consequently, when no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. He became aware gradually of a great blaze of ruddy light, which seemed to shine upon him from the adjoining room. He got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. It was his own sitting room, no doubt about that. But it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceilings were so hung with living green that it looked like a perfect grove. From every part of the ceiling were so hung with living green, and from which bright gleaming berries glistened, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as had never been known in Scrooge's time, or for many a winter season gone. Heaped up on the floor, to form a kind of throne, were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, great joints of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon his couch, there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in the shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door.
Come in! Oh, come in and know me better, man. I'm the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me.
Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple green robe, bordered with white fur. On its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. Girded round its middle with an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust.
You've never seen the likes of me before.
Never.
Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning I am very young. My elder brothers, born in these later years.
I don't think I have. I'm afraid I have not. Have you had many brothers, Spirit?
Oh, more than 1,800.
What a tremendous family to provide for. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion and learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Touch my robe.
Scrooge did as he was told. All vanished instantly, the room and its contents, and they stood in the city streets upon a snowy Christmas morning. Scrooge and the ghost passed on, invisible, straight to Scrooge's clerks. And on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled, and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap but make a goodly show for sixpence. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelled the goose and known it for their own.
What has ever got your precious father then? And your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha, who's as late as last Christmas Day by half an hour?
Here's Martha, Mother. Hooray! There's such a goose, Martha.
Oh, why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are.
We'd a deal of work to finish up late last night, and I had to clear away this morning, Mother.
Oh, well, never mind, so long as you've come. Sit you down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm. Lord bless you.
No, there's Father coming. Hide, Martha, hide.
So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame.
Why, where's our Martha?
Not coming.
Not coming? Not coming upon Christmas Day?
Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the other 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off into the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper.
And how did little Tim behave?
As good as gold and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him in the church, because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant for them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. I really do believe he's getting stronger, don't you?
Tiny Tim's active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool before the fire. Master Peter and the 2 young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy ready beforehand in a little saucepan. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the breast. But when she did, and with a long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all round the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the 2 young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife, and feebly cried,
Hurrah! There never was such a goose.
It was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, everyone had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it. With a great deal of steam, the pudding was out of the copper. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in a half a quadrant of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top.
Oh, what a wonderful pudding!
This is the greatest success achieved, my dear, since we were married.
I had my doubts about the flour.
Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle.
A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us.
Merry Christmas!
God bless us, everyone.
Said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him.
Spirits, tell me, will Tiny Tim live?
I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner in the crutch, without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die.
Oh, no, kind spirits, say he will be spared.
If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none of my race will find him here. What then? Man, if man you be in heart and not alone in shape, forbear such wickedness until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live and what men shall die? It may be in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child.
Scrooge bends before the spirit's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground. But he raised them speedily on hearing his own name.
Mr. Scrooge. I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
Oh, the founder of the feast indeed. I wish I had him here. I'd give him the peace of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it.
My dear, the children, Christmas Day.
It should be Christmas Day, I'm sure, on which one drinks to the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. Now, you know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you, poor dear.
My dear, Christmas Day.
I'll drink to his health for your sake and for the day's, not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt.
There was nothing of high mark in all this. They were not a handsome family, these Cratchits. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty and had known, very likely, the insides of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. When at last they faded, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. From behind him, Scrooge hears a long, hearty, and familiar laugh. After a moment, he recognizes it.
Fred?
He turns toward the laugh, suddenly finding himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room in a finely appointed house. The spirit, standing smiling by Scrooge's side, looks at Scrooge's nephew with approving affability. Scrooge's nephew, Fred, laughs, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions. Scrooge's niece by marriage laughs as heartily as he.
He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live. He believed it too.
Oh, more shame for him, Fred.
Scrooge's niece is very pretty with a dimpled, surprised-looking capital face, a ripe little mouth that seemed made to be kissed, as no doubt it was.
He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against it.
I'm sure he is very rich, Fred. At least you always tell me so.
What of that, my dear? His wealth is of no use to him. He don't do any good with it. He don't make himself comfortable with it.
I have no patience with him.
Oh, I have. I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here, he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence of his taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us? I think that he loses some pleasant moments which could do him no harm. I am sure he loses pleasanter companions than he can find in his own thoughts, either in his moldy old office or his dusty chambers. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I pity him. He may rail at Christmas till he dies, but he can't help thinking better of it. I defy him. If he finds me going there in good temper year after year and saying, "Uncle Scrooge, how are you?" if it only puts him in the vein to leave his poor clerk £50, that's something. I think I shook him yesterday. He has given us plenty of merriment, I'm sure, and it would be ungrateful not to drink his health. I say, Uncle Scrooge.
Uncle Scrooge.
The whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. While Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older.
Our spirits' lives so short.
My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight.
Tonight?
Tonight at midnight, hark, the time is drawing near.
The chimes were ringing the 11:03 at that moment.
Forgive me if I'm not justified in what I ask, but I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?
It might be a claw for the flesh there is upon it. Look here.
From the foldings of its robe it brought two children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment.
Oh man, look here, look down here.
They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, wolfish. Scrooge started back, appalled.
Spirit, are they yours?
They are man's. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware them both in all their degree, but most of all beware the boy. For on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased.
Have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee. From the air through which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved.
I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come.
The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand.
You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us. Is that so, Spirit?
The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received.
Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any specter I have seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear your company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?
It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them.
Lead on. Lead on, spirit. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me. I know. Lead on.
They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them. For there they were in the heart of it on 'change, amongst the merchants. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk.
I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead.
When did he die?
Last night, I believe.
Why? What was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die.
God knows.
What's he done with his money?
I haven't heard. Left it to his company, perhaps, but he hasn't left it to me. That's all I know.
It's likely to be a very cheap funeral, for upon my life I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer?
I don't mind going if a lunch is provided.
Speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with other groups. Scrooge knew the men and looked toward the spirit for an explanation.
What is the meaning of this, spirit? Of what poor soul do they speak of?
They left this busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town to a low shop where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. A gray-haired rascal of great age sat smoking his pipe. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she'd scarcely entered when another woman similarly laden came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black. After a short period of blank astonishment in which the old man with a pipe had joined them, they all three burst into a laugh.
Oh, let the charwoman alone to be the first. Let the laundress alone to be the second. And let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe. Here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it.
Yeah, couldn't have met in a better place. Come into the parlor. You made me free of it long ago, you know, and the other two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut the door of the shop. Ah, Scriggs. There ain't such a rusty bit of metal in the place as its own hinges. I believe, and I'm sure there's no such old bones here as mine. We're all suitable to our calling. We're well matched. Come into the parlor. Come into the parlor.
The parlor was the space behind the screen of rags. The woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor and sat down in a flaunting manner on the stool, crossing her elbows on the knees and looking with a bold defiance at the other two.
What odds then? Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did.
That's true indeed. No man more so.
Why then don't stand staring as if you was afraid, woman. Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose.
No, indeed. We should hope not.
Very well then. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose.
No, indeed.
Well, if you wanted to keep them after he was dead, wicked old Screw, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with the death, instead of lying, gasping, out his last there, alone by himself.
Why, it's the truest word that ever was spoke. It's a judgment on him.
Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid to let them see it. We know pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met them, I believe. It's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe.
But the gallantry of her friends would not allow of this. and the man in the faded black mounting the breach first produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums he was deposed to give to Breach upon the wall, and added them up to a total when he found there was nothing more to come.
That's your account, and I wouldn't give you another sixpence if I was to be boiled for not doing it. Who's next?
Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner.
I always give too much to the ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself. That's your account, and if you ask me for another penny and made it in an open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown.
And now undo my bundle, Joe.
Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff.
And what do you call this? Bed curtains?
Bed curtains.
You don't mean to say you took them rings and all? With him lying there?
Oh, yes, I did. Why not?
You were born to make your fortune, and you'll certainly do it. His blankets?
Well, who's happened, do you think? He isn't likely to take coat without him, I dare say.
Hope he didn't die of anything catching, eh?
Oh, don't you be afraid of that. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things if he did. Oh, you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one, too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me.
Now, what do you call wasting it?
Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it isn't good enough for anything. It's quite as becoming to the body. You can't look any uglier than you did in that one.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror.
This is the end of it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead.
Spirit, I see the case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heavens, what is this?
He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay something covered up. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced round it in obedience to a secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light rising in the outer air fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face.
Spirit, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me, let's go.
Still the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head.
I understand you, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power.
Again it seemed to look upon him.
Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected with this death. Or this dark chamber, Spirit, will forever be present to me.
The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire, quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in needlework. The mother laid her work upon the table, and put her hand up to her face.
This color hurts my eyes. There, better now. The candlelight makes them weak. I couldn't show the eyes to your father when he comes home now. Not for the world. It must be near his time.
Past it, rather. But I think he's walked a little slower than he used to these few evenings, Mother.
Oh, I've known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed.
And so have I, often.
He was so very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was natural. And yet, here's your father at the door.
She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob, in his comforter, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in.
You went today then, Robert?
Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. My child, my little child.
He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been farther apart, perhaps, than they were.
I happened to come across Mr. Scrooge's nephew just today in the street, and he said to me, "I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit, and heartily sorry for your good wife. If I can be of service to you in any way," giving me his card, "that's where I live." Now, it wasn't for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his kind way. It really seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim, and he felt with us.
I'm sure he is a good soul.
He is indeed. But however and whenever we part from one another, I am sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or this first parting that there was among us.
No,
Never,
of course
Father,
not.
no,
Never,
of
Father.
course not.
And I know that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was little child, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it.
That's
No,
right. No,
never,
never
Father.
forget.
That's right.
I am very happy. I am very happy.
Spectre, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me, that man that was in the covered face, whom we saw lying dead.
The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous graveyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to him.
Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be only?
Still, the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood.
Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which, if preserved in, they must lead. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me.
The spirit was as immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge.
Oh, Spirit, oh, no, Spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I am not the man I must have been, but for this intercourse. Why show me this if I have passed all hope? Assure me that I may have changed these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons they have teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone.
Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in.
They're not torn down,
cried Scrooge, folding one of his bed curtains in his arms.
They are not torn down, rings and all. They are here. I am here. Oh, the shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. Oh, I will live in the past, in the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees. Oh, Jacob, on my knees. so I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everyone. A Happy New Year to all the world.
Really, for a man who'd been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs.
I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Oh, never mind. I don't care. I'd rather be a baby.
He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he'd ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it up and put out his head.
No fog, no mist. Clear, bright, jovial, stirring cold. Cold, piping for the blood to dance to. Golden sunlight, heavenly sky. Sweet fresh air. Merry bells, oh glorious, glorious! What's today?
Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes who perhaps had loitered in to look upon him.
Hey, what's today, my fine fellow?
Today? What Christmas Day it was?
It's Christmas Day, I haven't missed it! Hello, my fine fellow, hello. Oh, do you know the poulterers in the next street but one, at the corner?
Oh, I should hope I did.
Oh, an intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Oh, do you know whether they sold the prize turkey that was hanging up? No, not the little one, but the big one.
What, the one as big as me?
Oh, what a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, me buck.
Well, it's hanging there still.
Oh, it is? Oh, well, go and buy it.
Go on.
No. I am in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with a man and I'll give you a shilling. Oh, come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown.
The boy was off in a shot.
I'll send it to Bob Cratchit. He shot know who sent it. Oh, it's twice the size of Tiny Tim.
The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye.
I shall love it as long as I live.
It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped them short off in a minute like sticks of sealing wax.
Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town. You must have a cab.
The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again, and chuckled till he cried. Scrooge dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth, as he'd seen them with the ghost of Christmas present. And walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said,
Good morning, sir. Merry Christmas to you.
Oh, Merry Christmas, my fine gentlemen.
Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he'd ever heard, those were the blithest to his ears. Farther down the street, Scrooge suddenly tenses up. Coming on towards him, he sees the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting house the day before and said, Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Scrooge slows down for a moment. Then he resolves himself to do what he must do. He quickens his pace and he takes the gentleman by both hands.
My dear sir, how do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. Merry Christmas to you, sir.
Mr. Scrooge?
Yes, that is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon, and will you have the goodness to...
Scrooge whispers in his ear. The gentleman reacts as if his breath were gone.
Lord bless me, my dear Mr. Scrooge. Are you serious?
Oh, if you please, and not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it. I assure you now. Will you do me that favor?
My dear sir, I don't know what to say to such generosity.
Oh, don't say anything, please. Just come and see me, will you?
I will. Oh, Merry
Oh,
Christmas.
thank you. I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you.
Scrooge turned his steps toward his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. Then he made a dash and did it.
Is your master at home, my dear?
Said Scrooge to the girl, a nice girl.
Yes, sir. He's in the dining room, sir, along with the mistress.
He knows me. I'll go in there. Hello, my dear nephew.
Why, bless my soul, who's that?
It is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?
Let him in. It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. And nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he'd set his heart on, and he did it. The clock struck 9. No Bob. A quarter past? No Bob. Bob was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open, that he might see him come into the tank. Bob's hat was off. Before he even opened the door, his comforter too. He was on his stool in jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
Hello there, Mr. Cratchit.
Growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it.
What do you mean by coming in here at this time of day?
I'm very sorry, sir. I'm behind my time.
You are? Yes, I think you are. Step this way, Cratchit, if you please.
Oh, it's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore...
Scrooge continued leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again.
And therefore, I'm going to raise your salary!
Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him, and calling to the people in the court for help and a straitjacket.
Merry Christmas, Bob! A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I've given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family.
Mr. Scrooge, are you quite yourself, sir?
No. Thank heaven, no, I am not quite myself. Merry Christmas, Bob. We will discuss your affairs this afternoon after a bowl of smoking bishop. Bob, make up the fires and buy a second coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but his own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived in that respect upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed,
God bless us, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You are the third audience to ever see this adaptation of the show. Let me introduce you to this amazing cast. Audra Buchanan. Dan Taylor. Ron Noro. PJ Noro. Dorothy Shane gracing our stage for the very first time, Andrew Perry and Steve Perry. to Shirley and Ronnie and Luna and all of our front of house volunteers. They're taking care of everything. Much love to Kyle Amiot for running our sound and lights. A great big thank you to Norman and Debbie Bonner at Everything Music for letting us use these music stands. Go check them out. Don Main Street. A lot of great stuff around there. I do need to give a great big thank you to my partner in crime, who the man who, when I have crazy ideas, makes them happen.
He gets a lot of crazy ideas.
I get a lot of crazy ideas. And sometimes they're big, and he goes, yeah, we can't do that. We can't do that. But we are working on a rotating stage, apparently. Steve Perry. He did this amazing set. You know, he just came out.
Our beautiful fire.
Our beautiful fire. Yes, he just makes everything possible. So, Steve, thank you so much. And I thank all of you for coming to see this. We have one more show left. Please spread the word. Thank you and Merry Christmas.